Back, we're going to take a deep dive today into some interesting ideas about wealth and poverty.
Okay.
And we're getting those ideas from none other than Robert Kiyosaki,
Right.
specifically his YouTube video from November 2024.
Okay.
It's called "It's So F-Char Backing Easy to Get Rich."
Oh, wow.
With a title like that,
Yeah.
how can we not take a closer look? So is it really that easy to get rich? And why does it seem like the gap between the rich and poor keeps getting bigger and bigger?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Let's unpack Kiyosaki's take on that.
All right, let's jump in. It's worth noting that Kiyosaki's approach can be a bit provocative, but he often raises thought-provoking points even if you don't always agree with his conclusions.
Absolutely. And he starts off with a story about a 1964 Kennedy half dollar,
Okay.
the last year they were made with silver.
Interesting.
And this coin sparked his early interest in what he calls real money versus fake money.
Okay.
And that's a theme he carries throughout the whole video.
Yes, and it's interesting how he connects this childhood memory to a bigger economic principle called Gresham's Law.
Gresham's Law.
Yeah, it essentially states that bad money drives out good.
Okay, I'm curious, how does this bad money driving out good idea apply to us, in our everyday financial lives?
Well, think of it this way.
Okay.
Kiyosaki argues that fiat currency, like the dollar, is bad money because governments can just print more of it at any time,
Right.
which can decrease its value over time. This ties into his idea that we need to be savvy about where we put our money and if it's truly holding its value or if
Right.
it's slowly being eroded by inflation.
That makes you think about savings accounts a little differently, doesn't it?
It does.
So is he saying we should all be stocking up on silver dollars like his childhood collection?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
He uses silver along with gold and Bitcoin as examples of what he calls real assets.
Real assets.
Yeah, these are things that have inherent value
Right.
and are limited in supply.
I see.
He contrasts them with what he considers fake assets, such as fiat currency and even stocks and bonds.
Wait, he considers stocks fake assets.
Yeah,
That seems like a pretty bold statement,
it is.
especially for people who rely on the stock market for retirement savings.
It is a bold statement, and whether or not you agree with his classification, it raises some interesting questions about the nature of different assets and their long-term value.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, listener? Are stocks always a reliable store of value?
It definitely challenges the conventional wisdom around investing.
It does.
But let's get back to the main point here.
Sure.
How does all this real versus fake money stuff tie into the gap between the rich and poor?
This is where Kiyosaki gets to his core argument.
Okay.
He suggests that poor people stay poor because they don't understand the difference between real and fake money. They work for fake money dollars and don't acquire assets that appreciate in value over time. He believes the rich, on the other hand, focus on acquiring real assets that grow in value regardless of what happens to the dollar.
So he's basically saying that understanding this concept is the key to building wealth.
In a nutshell, yes.
Okay.
But hold on, before we take that as gospel,
Right.
I think it's worth diving into the nuances here.
Yeah. What are some of those?
Is it really that simple?
Right.
Are there other factors at play that contribute to wealth inequality?
Yeah.
And what about people who work incredibly hard but still struggle to make ends meet?
Okay. Yeah. I feel like there's more to it than that.
There is.
Let's dig into those questions when we come back.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely more complicated than just understanding the difference between real and fake assets.
Right.
Kiyosaki's perspective risks oversimplifying a really complex issue.
So what are some of the nuances that maybe he's not fully addressing?
Well, for starters, the ability to acquire assets in the first place often depends on things outside of an individual's control.
Like what?
Think about things like inherited wealth
Okay. Yeah.
or access to affordable housing.
Right.
Even just your geographical location can play a huge role.
Right. It's much easier to invest in real estate if you're already starting with a big chunk of money for a down payment.
Exactly.
And if you're living in a really expensive city, saving enough to buy property can feel impossible, even with a good job.
Exactly. And then there are the systemic inequalities we touched on earlier.
Right.
Discrimination in lending practices, disparities in educational opportunities. Those things can create barriers to building wealth that go way beyond simply knowing what a real asset is.
So it's like he's offering up a powerful tool,
Yeah,
but not everyone even has access to the toolbox.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
It highlights the need to address those systemic issues alongside promoting financial literacy.
Okay.
But let's go back to Kiyosaki's ideas.
Right.
Even if you have the tools and knowledge, is it really that easy to get rich?
That's what I'm wondering. It
Yeah,
makes it sound like financial heaven is just around the corner if you buy the right things. But we all know the world is a lot more complicated than that.
absolutely. Remember that quote he uses? There's a million ways to go to financial heaven, but a billion ways to go to financial hell.
Yeah, it's kind of daunting, to be honest.
It
Like,
is.
even if you understand the basic concepts, there are still so many things that could go wrong.
Exactly. There's an element of risk in any financial decision.
For sure.
And managing that risk takes not only knowledge, but also a good dose of caution and planning.
Right.
And we can't forget about all those YouTube gurus Kiyosaki calls out,
Well,
the
yeah.
ones pushing get-rich-quick schemes.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in that kind of hype and make impulsive decisions.
Just like anything else on the internet. Don't
Yeah.
believe everything you see.
Yeah.
So how do we or our listeners cut through the noise and figure out what really matters?
It all comes back to critical thinking.
Okay.
When you hear financial advice, especially online, be skeptical.
Okay.
Look beyond the promises and dig into the source's credibility. Do they have a proven track record? Does their advice align with your personal goals and risk tolerance?
And don't be afraid to get different perspectives.
Right.
What might work for one person won't necessarily work for another.
Right. Your financial journey is unique. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah, that's true.
So where do Kiyosaki's ideas fit into all of this? If we were to boil his message down to its most helpful essence, what would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners?
That's a great question. I think it comes down to a few things. First, understanding the importance of owning assets that grow in value.
And being mindful of how inflation can affect your wealth.
Right. And while we're talking about inflation, Kiyosaki brings up a really interesting point about how the U.S. government is printing trillions of dollars.
Yes, and he argues that this benefits people who own real assets because those assets tend to go up in value when there's more money in circulation,
Right.
but it can hurt those who mostly hold cash or have a lot of debt.
So it seems like understanding these concepts, real versus fake assets, inflation, the impact of government policies, is crucial for anyone trying to navigate the world of personal finance.
I completely agree. Whether you fully subscribe to Kiyosaki's philosophies or not, he makes us think differently about where we put our money and what it really means to build wealth.
And I appreciate that he doesn't just focus on the doom and gloom.
Yeah.
He also encourages people to find a path that aligns with their passions. Remember what he said, invest in what you love.
That's one of his most compelling ideas. It's about finding that sweet spot where your interests and potential for growth intersect.
So it doesn't always have to be about stocks or real estate.
Yep.
Maybe you invest in your education, a side business you're passionate about, or even a collection of rare comic books, if that's your thing. It's about finding something that excites you and has the potential to gain value over time.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe along the way you'll discover that it's not so sharp at cocking hard to get rich after all.
Maybe. But even if you don't reach those heights, the journey itself can be incredibly rewarding.
Well said.
Yeah, it really is. It forces you to think outside the box a little bit,
It does.
like beyond those traditional investments,
Yeah.
and think about the things you're really passionate about.
Right.
What about you? Do you have any personal investments that bring you both joy and the potential for growth?
It's funny you should ask. I've always loved learning about history.
Okay.
And over the years, I've built up a collection of antique maps.
Really?
Yeah, it started as a hobby,
Cool.
but some of those maps have actually become quite valuable.
That's a perfect example. It's
Yeah.
something you love, and it also happens to have appreciated in value.
Yeah.
It challenges the idea that investing always has to be about stocks and bonds and real estate.
Exactly.
It can be about anything that speaks to your passions and has the potential to grow over time.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important takeaway from Kiyosaki's message. It's about finding that intersection between your interests and potential opportunities.
Yeah.
It might be something tangible like my maps,
Right.
or it could be investing in your skills or knowledge, like taking a course in a field you're excited about.
That's a great point. Investing in yourself can be one of the most valuable things you can do.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't have to cost a fortune.
Right.
There are so many free resources available online, from podcasts like this one
Yeah, for sure.
to online courses and tutorials.
Exactly. There's a wealth of knowledge out there just waiting to be tapped into.
I like that.
And the more you learn, the more equipped you'll be to make informed decisions about where to put your time, energy, and resources. It all circles back to that idea of empowering yourself.
And that's what we hope you take away from this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, from Kiyosaki's provocative ideas about real versus fake assets to the importance of understanding inflation and being mindful of systemic inequalities. But ultimately, it's about taking control of your financial future, being an active participant rather than a passive bystander.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about being proactive, informed, and engaged, and always seeking out new knowledge and perspectives.
Well said. So to our listeners, keep those questions in mind.
Yeah, think about it.
If you could invest in anything you loved, what would it be? What's one small step you can take today to make that a reality? Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep. Thanks for joining us.